morning. Please take your seats. Mr. Sergeant.
Good morning.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Mr. Sergeant, just for the record, I note that you're giving your evidence by video link this morning. Would you like to take the oath, or I understand that you're going to take the affirmation, is that correct?
No Bible, so I'll take the affirmation.
Good. Could you please repeat after me? Sorry, we'll start with your full name. What is your full name, please?
Barry Andrew Sargent.
Please repeat after me. I, Barry Andrew Sargent, sincerely declare and affirm.
I, Barry Andrew Sargent, sincerely declare and confirm.
That's and affirm.
And affirm.
That the evidence that I give to this commission.
That the evidence I give to this commission.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Sergeant. Now, Mr. Evans will ask you some questions and he will confirm that you can hear and see him. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Commissioners. Mr. Sergeant, you've been summoned to appear before this Royal Commission today.
Yes.
And you've been invited to prepare a witness statement dealing with a number of topics.
Correct.
And you've caused that witness statement to be prepared.
Yes.
You have a copy of that witness statement in front of you.
Yes.
It has, I think, 120 paragraphs over 38 pages.
Yes.
And is signed and dated by you the 8th of September 2021.
Yes.
Now, I think you've read it and there are two corrections you'd like to make to the witness statement. Is that correct?
There is two corrections, yes.
So can I take you to paragraph 86.1?
The word decreasing should read increasing.
This goes back to a terminological issue that's bedeviled us as to whether one is increasing or decreasing at the speed of the
We
game.
do.
Um, increasing the speed. So that change is made.
And the last change is on page 38, the place of which you made your statement was in fact Sydney rather than Perth.
I signed in Sydney, not in Perth, yes.
Thank you. Perth is deleted and Sydney is inserted.
And other than that, in relation to the topics upon which you've been invited to give evidence, that is your evidence to the best of your knowledge, information and belief.
Correct, it is.
I tender that.
So the amended statement of Mr. Sergeant, which is,
I
believe it has a number, and I think Mr. Future may be able to assist you with that.
Yes, it's GWC .0003.0019.001.
Correct.
So the amended statement with that number will be an exhibit in the commission. Mr. Evans, just note on, might be just the copy that I've got, but at the front of the document it says 8 September 2021, and then on the last page it says F ? September 2021.
Maybe your copy, Commissioner. Mine says 8 September 2021.
Right. All right.
We'll note it as 8.
Thank you. Then I will note mine as 8 too. Mine's signed and everything, and it still says that. Must have been whichever printer was printing mine out had a mind of its own.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. Yes,
Mate, please, Commissioner.
Mr. Futrell.
Mr. Sergeant, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can.
My name is Michael Futrell. I'm one of the council assistants in the commission. I'm going to examine you on a few topics. Before I do, can I just ask you, you might recall you gave a statement earlier to this commission in May. Do you have a copy of that with you as well?
Yes.
Oh, good, thank you. Just wanted to make sure you had them both. Can I ask you, if you don't mind, to go to your most recent statement and turn to paragraphs. Well, this is the first topic you're asked about, and it's on the paragraphs I'm interested in, are paragraphs 7 and 8, where you've described there the remuneration of the members of the GWC for the period during which you were the Director General and also a member. And you indicated the amount is, the remuneration range between $10,000 and $20,000 per annum. I have a question for you, which is in relation to, given the breadth of responsibilities of the GWC as a body, and I've become familiar in the course of this commission with the volume of material that is before each meeting. In your view, is remuneration of that level an appropriate level of remuneration for members of the GWC?
Based on what's happened since the Royal Commission's been appointed, I definitely say no. But prior to that, I think it was a fair amount to be paid. It was increased a reasonable amount. I think back when the Racing and Wagering body was created and the Gaming and Wagering Commission became part of the regulatory framework for the Gaming and Wagering Commission. But other than that, I thought for the volume of papers that generally went to the Commission before I left the body, it was fair. And I didn't think it substantially increased until around about the time before the Royal Commission was created and we had all those issues to do with the overseas people participating in the activities of the casino, in the junkets, etc.
All right, Mr. Sargent, I'm not sure I completely understand that answer. So are you suggesting, just clarify this point if you don't mind, that the remuneration up until the point at which all of the allegations in connection with the Bergen inquiry became known and public, you consider the remuneration to have been fair and now not so much? Or are you saying, in the benefit of hindsight, it never was in fact a fair and adequate amount of remuneration?
I'm not saying with the benefit of hindsight that it was a fair remuneration. I think in recent times, as it highlight issues to do with the junkets, etc., it may not have been a fair representation. But in my experience, it was very hard to get a remunerated body have their salaries or their sitting fees increased unless there was a very good case. And in my time, I would have been asking them just to review, that is the Public Sector Commissioner, just to review the remuneration.
Well, you anticipate our next question, Mr. Sargent. So in paragraph 9, you make reference to, I think, having made, perhaps 8 and 9, having made a submission to the Public Sector Commission and it being refused in around 2016. My question really is, what was the nature of the submission made at that time?
If my memory serves me correct, it was just a request to review the remuneration.
As little as that, or was there a document that went with it that explained the reasons why, in your view, a remuneration review was required?
I can't recall preparing a detailed submission. All I can remember is writing to the Commissioner to ask for a review of the salaries of the sitting members, given that they hadn't been increased for some time. But no, I can't recall anything else other than that.
I see. So the nature of the review sought was really one, hasn't been increased for some time, about time for an increase, rather than having regard to all these factors, taking into account the responsibilities and so forth, the remuneration should be increased.
I don't think I refer to things like responsibilities. I just think, if I recall correctly, I just asked for a review of the sitting fees.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sargent. Might I ask you now if you I think you've had an opportunity. I appreciate you may not have access to all of the documents that you once had, but I understand from your statement you have had regard to some of the materials that have been made available through this commission in answering a number of the questions. And I've got a series of questions I'd like to ask you about the what is referred to as the financial or the services charge or the recoupment fee or words to that effect, which you've dealt with in paragraphs 13 to 21 of your statement. Just before I ask you some questions about that, in your first statement, and you can go and have a look at this if you wish, in paragraph 12, you indicated that for the time that you were chairman of the GWC, you reviewed the board papers that before they went to the GWC members before each meeting. That was your usual habit, I understand.
As chair, I would review the papers.
And and in undertaking that exercise, were you reviewing them for to ensure that there was adequate information provided to the members in respect of each of the items in the agenda?
Well, that would have been one of the considerations that if I was not happy with them from the point of view of content, then I'd probably ask them to either add material or defer it to the next meeting. But that was one of the considerations.
And can I ask you this question in connection with that? As the Director General of the department at the time, were the views of the papers prepared by each of the departmental officers reflective of your own view in each case, or did they have some independence?
There would have been independence. I didn't want people just to rubber stamp things the way I felt, but there would have been a degree of independence. But I was looking for good advice to go to the Commission.
And when you say good advice, do you mean to say by that you had some influence over the nature of the advice that went to the Commission?
Well, if I thought there was something major, I'd just make my own submission if I had to, if I was to discuss it with an officer preparing it. But in the main, sometimes documents would go to the Commission and I'd be happy with the case put, but I may not necessarily support it when it got to the Commission meeting.
I see. Could I ask that we call up document PUB .0002.00156, and this this document, Mr. Sergeant, is an annual report of the GWC for 2005 and 2006. And if I could ask the operator if the operator could just show the first page to Mr. Sergeant and then navigate to page 0168. And could I ask Mr. Sergeant, I just want to direct your attention to the heading Summary of Financial and Non-Financial Indicators, including changes from the previous year. And there's a paragraph there that begins as at 30 June 2006. Do you mind just reading that? I've got a question for you when you finish.
Could it be bigger, a little bit bigger to read? Should it be a bit larger?
I'm sure it can be.
That's better.
Is there
Yeah.
any way that screen can be brought closer to you?
No, I can't, the way the desks, but I can read that comfortably.
All right, thank you.
Have you finished reading it, Mr. Sergeant?
I read it, yes.
I think this year's financial statements and budget, I think, were the subject of one of the topics that you've been asked to address, and you've addressed. I'm interested in the third sentence that begins, the recruitment rate is determined on a full cost recovery basis of the total expenses of the department, that statement. Was that an accurate statement as of the preparation of the annual report for the GWC in 2006?
Well, I would presume so. I can't recall specifically back then as to what happened, but the costs of the department were recovered effectively, some from the Gaming Commission and some from appropriation of Parliament, and other fees that were raised by the department. But I've got no reason to say anything other than what I can read there.
Well, is it your recollection from your time as the chairman of the GWC and the Director General of the department that the basis upon which the recoupment rate or the service fee of the department was charged to the GWC was, as it's described there, on a full cost recovery basis?
We would attempt to recover the cost. Later on in my particular statement, I do refer to times when we might have had some benefits in regard to revenue flows within the department, and we would have basically retained some of those extra revenues by crediting or reducing the service fee from that the department was charging the gaming and wage. Sorry, the department was charging the Gaming and Wagering Commission. But that's the large extent to which we charged for the services. Roughly, I recall it was usually about 30% as the revenue that the department received came from the Gaming and Wagering Commission. Roughly that sort of figure.
I understand what the figure may ultimately have ended up being around 30% of the costs of the department. The question I'm really asking you is whether the foundation or the basis for the charge was understood to be and intended to be on a full cost recovery of the, in other words, what the department spent providing the services to the GWC, it recovered from the GWC. As
determined, yes, by the finance department, and yes, it would have been. So otherwise, the department would have been short on revenue, and therefore would not have been able to function because it would have had to go back to get some more funds from the Treasury through an additional appropriation.
All right, so I'm just emphasising this in distinction to, for instance, in a commercial arrangement, the party providing the services may add a profit margin, for instance, to the fees. This is not one of those arrangements. You were simply wishing to pass through the department's costs to the GWC.
That is correct. There was never an attempt to generate a profit on the services provided. It was definitely designed to recoup the costs incurred. One of the biggest issues always was trying to allocate overheads across those costs, but that was the intention, only recover costs, no profit margin.
I understand there can be some debates about overhead recovery. I want to come to that in a moment, but before I leave the topic, is this statement essentially in the 2006 financial or the annual report for the GWC reflective of the position throughout the period that you were the chairman of the GWC?
As chairman of the GWC, it was never my understanding nor intention that the department would be charging a profit margin on the service provided.
No, so just to be clear about this, Mr. Sargent, for the period that you were chairman of the GWC, it was the intention to pass through the costs incurred by the department to the GWC, is that correct?
To the GWC, yes.
All right, now, I've unfortunately somehow managed to rearrange my page. I'm not sure how I managed to do that, but so I'm sorry, Mr. Sargent, I've momentarily lost my place. Could I ask that we call up GWC .0011.0011.0225. And in this should be an agenda for a GWC meeting in June 2005. And if I could ask that we move to page 0388. And again, Mr. Sargent, I'm going to ask you to read this. You may have already read it before today in the preparation of your statement, but I'd ask you to read this page, which is the page 0388, and the following page 0389. And there are three parts I want to draw to your attention before I ask you some questions. The first is there's a paragraph that begins the recoupment of services provided by the Department of Racing and Gaming. That paragraph, which is the third paragraph on page 0388. The last bullet point on that page, and then on the following page, the various items that are identified there, which are identified in two columns, one for the previous year and one for the 2005-2006 year.
I haven't seen the next page. Have you seen what I'm seeing?
I wonder if the operator, this may be difficult because it's blown up, so for you, Mr. Sargent, if we could put them side by side, it may help you. But if you can't read them, then let me know and we'll do it one after the other.
I think you might do it one after the other. I don't think I'm going to split the screen here.
Just let me know when you're finished with the first page, Mr. Sargent.
First page is finished.
Can we navigate to the next page, please?
Okay, I've read that, yes.
All right. Now, bearing in mind this is a budget, so this is a document that is seeking to estimate the charges for the 2005-2006 year rather than an actual cost recovery at this stage. Could I ask you to well, the first question I have for you is it the case that the estimate really is saying, well, this is what the charge was in 2004, 2005. If we increase that by CPI, that ought to correlate more or less with the cost with the fee that we charged in 2005, 2006. Is that how I understand the paper?
Yes, bearing in mind though, the first paragraph does talk about the previous year. We must have had some savings. We've done something to reduce the charge by about, I don't know how much it was, but there was an element of decrease in the charge.
300,000.
Yeah. I can't recall why it was that happened.
All right. I'm not going to ask you about that 300,000 that was dealt with some years ago. I'm more interested in the understanding what was behind the figures in these budgets.
Sorry, what was that question again? What was that?
I'm more interested in understanding what was behind the figures in the budgets, not so much the numbers themselves at this time, Mr. Sargent. So if we look at the page that's 0389 and the various items there.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me that broadly speaking, they fall into two categories? There are costs in connection with direct costs of employing departmental staff, salaries, workers might be an overhead, but you're essentially trying to capture the cost of a person who is performing a service for the GWC as a direct or indirect cost of employment. One category. And the other category is that some proportion of the overhead in providing the services is sought to be captured as well under other operating costs, corporate services.
That's what's been prepared. That looks as though is the intention of that table.
Yeah, so look, I'm just trying to say, broadly speaking, what is being sought to be done is identify the direct costs of the staff, pass that through to the GWC, plus a recovery for a portion of the overheads of the department in providing the services.
Or things like workers' comp and superannuation might have been able to be appropriately apportioned. Rather than that, the rest of it would have been an overhead item, yes.
All right, but there would be a mechanism by which you can apportion between the staff the workers' comp premiums and superannuation, those sort of things.
I would suggest so. I would suggest so.
Okay, now, so when one reads full cost recovery in the financial statement and the annual report, are we to understand that to be that is a broad description for a breakdown of the kind that is referred to on this page?
Well, it would be to be the base salaries plus all the overhead costs involved.
All right. Now, could I ask that you be shown the annual report for I think we're going, sorry, back to the annual report for the GWC.
Is it this document or another one, Mr. Future?
Sorry, this is a different document. My apologies. This one's PUB 0002 0156, and the reference is at page 0229. Now, this is a note. This is a note to the financial statements for the GWC in 2005, 2006, and you'll see there under the heading significant variances. There's a series of numbers. I'm interested here in the service and contract fees, a little over 3 million for estimate, actuals around 2.5, and then a variance of 426,624. And then there's a note saying service and contract fees. The decrease is primarily due to reduction in the amount recouped by the Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor, etc.
Can we scroll down, please, so we can see that on the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'll just direct your attention to that paragraph. So you may...
Could that maybe a little bit bigger, the one about the service and contract fees?
Certainly.
Thank you. Well, that's the explanation being prepared, okay.
All right. Now, do we understand from that the recoupment fee, the full cost recovery for that year, was calculated in an actual way lower than the budget, meaning to say the actual costs of performing the services that year were at a variance of around $426,000?
I would suggest, consistent with what happened before, there would have been an extra revenue came into the department, and one way of retaining that was to reduce the service fee to the commission, which meant the commission was able to carry that amount of money forward. That's how I would answer that, but I've got no other explanation.
All right. Now, I don't completely understand that answer. So are you suggesting that if the department had received additional income in a year, revenue, that it would effectively pass on in some way part of the benefit of that to the GWC by reducing the fees charged to it? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I recall, yes.
All right. So that would not reflect a full cost recovery then, would it?
In that sense, but the budget was always set to that. Depending on how the fees were raised by the department, then we could reduce the amount that's charged for the Gaming Commission. By reducing that amount, it meant that we reduced more of a balanced budget within the department, but we did enable the commission to carry those monies forward because it had less expenditure to pay out. So the base charge was still based on full cost recovery when we did the budget.
The budget may have been full cost recovery, but that would make this report inaccurate, would it, in the sense that there was not in that year a full cost recovery because it was reduced by an amount for the reasons you've described.
Well, it was determined on that basis. That's the rate, and then at the end of the financial year, when we had some benefits from the revenue, then we did pass that through to the department. So in that sense, it wasn't the full cost recovery, but it was actually subsidised.
So going back to my question, that means the statement at the outset of the GWC annual report is not in fact accurate. It was not a full cost recovery basis for that year.
Well, the initial recruitment, so you use the word recruitment rate is determined on a full cost recovery basis. Now, the rate initially was determined on that, but subsequently it was reduced.
Was there an advantage to the department in passing on, if you like, the additional revenue in that way to the GWC?
Well, an advantage for both the department and the commission, because if we didn't pass it on, then it'll be just retained by Treasury.
I see. And so just explain to me how that works, how it would be retained by Treasury. Is that because there'd be a surplus balance in the bank account for the department?
Well, it could mean they take the cash out, but if you had an appropriation of, say, 10 million, you only spent 9.6 million, then basically the 400,000 difference would benefit back to the consolidated fund.
So you might have answered another question I had for you. So it's maybe what you're referring to in paragraph 18.1 of your statement. I'm going to ask you to look at that.
That was what that's for that year.
Yes, but you described there, I think, what you've just been talking about for this year.
Yeah.
Is this a means of effectively, to want a better way of describing it, parking some funds in the GWC for the purposes of the GWC without the department having to have its budget reduced by Treasury in that year?
No, because the revenues were determined differently. No, I don't think it did. I don't think it did.
Well, if Treasury saw the surplus of 400,000 in the department's accounts, I think you said that they would.
Sorry, Treasury wouldn't see the surplus because the way in which the amount was coming through, if we hadn't transferred that way, then the revenue would have been showing up as it had a surplus. There was no surplus reported to Treasury.
No, but had the revenue been recorded, and had there been a surplus in the accounts of the department, is it the case that Treasury would have then effectively utilised those funds for general purposes of the state rather than having them remain with the department and the GWC?
It would have taken those monies, yes.
So, do I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sargent, the process to have been as follows. During the annual budgeting process, a budget was prepared in which an estimate was made of the actual costs that the department would incur in providing the services to the GWC for the following year.
Yes.
And that then was reflected in the department's budget as a estimated revenue stream, and in the GWC's budget as an estimated cost or expense. At some point in that financial year, was it the case that a determination was made by the department as to whether it would in fact pass on the full cost to GWC in that year?
Yes.
And if for the purposes of the department, it was to its benefit to pass on, or if you like, an increase in revenue, it would do so for the purposes of effectively the department's budget.
Sorry, can you repeat that reasoning?
If a decision was made, it was in the interest of the department to reduce the charge to the GWC, it was done for the benefit of the department's budget in a particular.
I think the benefit would be more for the Gaming Commission, because had we not done that, then the benefit would not have flown back to the department. Back to the Gaming Commission. It would have been absorbed by the Treasury.
I see. What happened in circumstances where the reverse was the case, where the budget of the department, or the actual costs incurred by the department in a given year exceeded its estimate for that year? Did the department then charge an additional fee to the GWC for that year?
I can't recall it having done so, but there are some variances which you've asked for a comment on, which I can't answer in relation to other years. But generally speaking, we're able to manage affairs fairly well from year to year. I can't recall us having to go back to Treasury for a supplementary funding. But as I said, I can't recall everything that happened back then.
All right. Now, this process that has just been the subject of your evidence, was that made clear in any way, to your recollection, to the members of the GWC?
Well, I can't recall how it would have been explained to the GWC members. But it was the fact it was a saving gain to the Commission, was a benefit to the Commission, but I can't recall what would have transpired in communicating that to the Commission members.
You're familiar, I take it, or you remain familiar with the Financial Management Act?
Well, I can't recall much about it, but if you were to make statements, I can then take it from there.
The government process, the budgeting process of the government, you recall and are familiar with that process?
Yes.
And for the period during which, or the latter part of the period that you were the Director General of the department, Mr. Ng was the CFO of the department, correct?
Yes,
And do you recall that under the regime, the state regime, there's a requirement for the department to have a CFO,
yes,
and equally there was a requirement for the GWC to have a CFO as well as a state instrumentality.
Look, I know we had one for the department. I can't recall whether we actually appointed him specifically for the Gaming Wagering Commission, but I know we had one for the department. But I don't know whether he was formerly also the CFO for the Gaming Wagering Commission. I can't recall.
Well, the budget for the GWC was prepared by a departmental officer, was it not?
Yes.
And that the ultimate responsibility for preparation of that rested with the CFO of the department.
Yes.
So the CFO of the department was, in effect, the CFO for both the department and the GWC.
I would accept that, yes.
Now, would you agree that one of the purposes of this process is to ensure that there are accurate estimates made of the revenues and expenses of government departments each year?
That's the budget process, would work to that end.
And was it your practice to typically meet in the early part of each year with the CFO and go through the budget for the department?
It would be the early part of the calendar year, yes. We rely on them to bring the budget together for the department.
And was it at the same part of the same process you dealt with the budget for the GWC?
Normally the budget for the department was set first.
All right. So you set the department's budget, and then was there a follow-up where you set and determined what the budget for the GWC would be?
That would be normally the case, although I think the CFO would normally have a fair idea of what the budget for the Gaming and Wagering Commission would be, but fundamentally for the department was the main focus initially to see how it would all come together.
Do you recall, are you familiar with the terminology used in the budgetary process of an accountable authority?
Yes, it was the accountable authority, yes.
And that's the person or the entity that's responsible to the minister for the financial management and services of the relevant agency of the state.
Yes.
And as the Director General of the department, you were effectively the accountable authority for that department, weren't you?
Correct.
And did you understand that the GWC members, as to say the GWC was the accountable authority for the purposes of that state structure or some other person?
No, it was the accountable authority. The commission members were.
So the commission itself had the responsibility and accountability to the minister for its the preparation of its budget, correct?
Whilst had the responsibility, the work was done by the department for them, and the budget was put to the Gaming Commission.
Yes. So I'm just trying to understand how this worked, because essentially the same people, it seems, Mr. Sergeant, the CFO for the department is the CFO for the GWC, undertaking the same exercise for each of these entities. The department is determining effectively what it will charge the GWC, correct?
Yes.
Was there anyone in the room considering the GWC's position on whether the charges were or were not appropriate?
I don't think anybody in the room to represent either interest in that sense, bearing in mind that the relationship between the department and initially the Gaming Commission had been set in train well before I came on scene. We just continued it through. There was no staff for the Gaming and Wagering Commission. The staff would have come from the department.
would you accept this proposition that when you're calculating the actual costs incurred in the performance of these services, it would not be an exact science? There would be
Yes, I'd accept that, not an exact science, yes.
there would be elements of judgment required to work out what is and what is not truly a cost to be allocated to the provision of these services to the GWC.
Yes.
The decision-making process for the determination of the allocation was being undertaken by the departmental officers, was it not?
Yes, on behalf of the Commission as well.
And to your knowledge, was the process of reasoning, let's just say how the costs were allocated, how they were determined, provided in a transparent way to the GWC members?
When you say provide in a transparent way, what do you mean by that?
I mean, were they provided with a description of the way in which the charge was calculated?
I can't recall that being provided. They were just given a budget amount which we'd arrived at and put in the context of its revenues. No, I can't recall that analysis being provided.
All right. So I asked that question because we have been through the several papers and have not been able to ascertain any crisp explanation. Was it your practice at the GWC meetings to speak to the budget or bring in the CFO to speak to the budget?
I'd be prepared to speak to the budget, but if there was any queries which they were wanted, I was more than happy to bring the CFO, but very rarely did members request that activity.
All right. Now, when speaking to the budget, was an explanation given of the exact manner in which the costs had been allocated and the service charge are prepared?
My recollection would be no, but I could be proven wrong there.
So is it the case that, in effect, the department determined what it would charge the GWC, put that in the budget, and the GWC accepted that?
That'd be a fair description, yes.
And what of this process at the end of the financial year? Was it the case that you were keeping an eye on how the department's budget was travelling, and sometime in around May you met with the CFO again to discuss what costs would actually be charged to the GWC?
Well, the intention was never to increase the charge. It would definitely, if we had some revenues which would enable us to pass some of those benefits on to the Gaming and Wagering Commission, the decision could be made as to what the last month or 2 months of the fee would be.
All right, so that process, was that a process involving the CFO and yourself?
Normally with the CFO and myself, and would have been under the heads of the other sections of the department to see what other priorities there were within the department.
All right, now, in that process, were you considering then, in effect, a rebate, or whether you would reduce the cost charged to the GWC for that year for whatever reason?
That the options would be pursuing that or something else, but they'd be discussed of what the priorities were.
All right, and that decision was being made by the department, was it not? No one in the room again was there for the GWC, were they?
No, but in a sense, I had a dual role there. I was representing the GWC as well, being a member of the GWC.
Yes, I understand that. So, was it the case though that the GWC members were informed of this process before the outcome was determined, or were they informed after you decided what the rebate would be for the year?
I would suggest more likely after the rebate had been decided.
Commissioners, may I just ask one or two questions before I ask Mr. Sargent some more? Appreciate he's on the eastern seaboard. Are we proposing to, what time are we proposing to break for lunch?
I think in the past what we did was break at about 11 for half an hour, is that right? And then, because that would be 1 o'clock Sydney time, and then come back and take our lunch break
A little later.
a little bit. Yeah,
All right.
Commissioner,
that's around 1.
can I ask, say, Commissioner, I'm happy to work to Perth time. Please don't make any allowances for me. Commissioner, I'm happy to go. So go to normal and go to lunch at 1. That's fine, or whatever it is for yourselves.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sargent. So I would continue, Mr. Futrell, at this point.
Pleasure.
We might break a little bit earlier for morning tea, otherwise. Continue.
All right. Mr. Sargent, can I ask you to refer again to your statement, and this time I'd ask you to look at paragraphs 13 through to 16 of your statement. And you have described there, you'll recall that you've been asked a question around one of the budgets where there was a fairly significant increase in the recoupment charge for that year, and an explanation given to the effect that it's been adjusted to reflect now a true indication of costs. And you've described here that there was some sort of review undertaken in order to reach that conclusion.
Yes.
What I'm interested to know is you've referred there to a review by Mr. Younger, and that he undertook a review including estimating the time taken for an officer to do various tasks that are connected with the department's services provided to the GWC. I'm paraphrasing you, but that's the gist of it.
It wouldn't be for the GWC. It was, I think I referred to the fees and charges for licences and permits as distinct from the inspectorate side.
I see. So was this a task undertaken specifically to determine the time taken by departmental officers to deal with, for the purpose of the GWC at least, applications for licences and the like in connection with the Perth casino? And
the liquor licensing as well. It was across the board.
Yes, I understand. Sorry, and perhaps other things within the remit of the GWC as well. No. You've described the fact that we undertook this review of the fees and charges for the licences issued by the Gaming and Wagering Commission, but also there are many licences and permits under the Liquor Control Act. So that was the exercise was looking at the time taken to process an application for a bingo permit, for a standard lottery permit, for a key employer licence, for a hotel licence, for a approved manager licence, those sort of activities within the department. We had 2 programs, licensing and compliance. Okay, so this is dealing only with licensing, not with compliance.
Licensing side, that's right.
Okay. So, were you familiar with the way in which Mr. Younger went about his process of estimating time taken?
I can't recall. As a very competent officer, that's why we brought him in to work on this exercise.
All right. Do you recall whether there was any time-based analysis undertaken? That's to say, people kept time records of how long they were taking to do various tasks?
I don't know how he ascertained that, but that was one of the activities which I can recall he looked at to get some idea of what it would cost. So you've got the time, And then the average rate of salaries you would have to involve, whether it be a lower level officer or a higher level officer, you have to get an average sort of rate. But that would have been one of the principles he would have had to look at, is the time taken to process an application. But I can't recall the detail.
All right, so is it your understanding that Mr Young undertook some exercise by which he attempted to accurately estimate, for our purposes, the time departmental officers spent, the proportion of the time they spent really dealing with GWC licensing activities?
Yes, it would have been, yes.
Was there an equivalent review undertaken with respect to compliance activities?
No.
And why was that?
I can't recall why, but I think it was given the number of licences being processed and the number of staff involved, it's normally was a bigger proportion of the department's budget, but I can't give you an accurate reason why that wasn't done. All I know it was focused on the fees and charges.
All right. So is it the case then that having undertaken the exercise in this period, effectively the department reached the view that it had been undercharging the GWC for those services, and therefore the costs passed on to the GWC needed to be increased?
That's the way in which I read the particular documents, yes.
Okay, but again, the underlying principle here, as I understand your earlier evidence, is that what the department was seeking to do was pass through actual costs to the GWC.
Correct, yes.
And so is that okay? So that's your best understanding of the reference to true indication. Then it's not that there wasn't an attempt earlier to estimate actual costs. It's just you're doing it better going forward. Is that the gist of it?
Well, I think there had been a review done some time ago, because I can recall the Parliament had rejected the increase which was put through. I can't remember what day it was or what year it was, but it was some time ago. It would have been the 1990s, I suspect, that we would have done some sort of review.
Could I ask, just before we leave this topic, Mr. Sargent, if we could call up GWC .0007.0011, which should be the budget papers for the 2010 budget. And scroll to page 0493. Which is the beginning, I think, of the paper. Just to show you, Mr. Sargent, that's the beginning of the agenda paper, addressed to you as chair of the GWC, and then just move forward in that document, please, to page 0497, and you may recall a little earlier, Mr. Sargent, I showed you a budget for I think it was the 2005-2006 year, and that had the service fee broken up into various components. In this budget, it doesn't appear to have been done in that way. It's simply a line item. On page 0496. With around the middle of the page, services provided by DRGL and an amount, just a lump sum for the year. So I asked you a little earlier, in the delivery of the budget to the GWC each year, in these circumstances where there's no breakdown of that number, was that something that you as a matter of practice went through with the GWC to explain how that figure had been calculated and what its components were?
No, that budget's for the period ending the 28th of February 2009. It's not the full year costs. That's for 8 months, the 28th of February 2009. You're looking for the figures through to the 30th of June 2009?
I'm looking at page 0496.
And if you look at the heading up there, see on the left-hand side, so for the 8 months ended, 20, is that what you wanted to comment on?
I'm looking at the annual budget
of $3.277 million. And then what we would have anticipated, what the annual budget would be, what we're saying there, that we think we're travelling, that it's going to be $31,000 better off.
All right, then that's...
For some reason, I don't know why, but that's what it would, how I'd interpret that.
All right, so if you go back to the start of the document, which is at page 0493. I see, Mr. Sergeant. This is a paper updating, saying for that year there's an anticipated additional charge for 2008-2009.
Can you make it so I can read it, please?
This is on page 0493.
The overall deficit, yeah, for the Commissioner, I thought, didn't it show that the service charge from DRGL was only 30,000 of that?
Well, there's an estimate. You've said the fee is going to increase for that year. And I thought you'd said earlier there were not years when the fee went up.
I said, yeah, unless it was explained, but it's saying that we're going to have a recorded deficit of 120,000 for the period. There's no enough detailed explanation as to how much ultimately that was going to be comprised of. Yeah. And so the projected outturn results indicates a surplus for this financial year, so it's a bit confusing.
All right, now, I think I may have... I need a little trouble with my electronic copies. This might be a convenient time to...
We'll take morning tea now, Mr. Sergeant, and we will return again at 20 minutes past 11, which is 20 minutes past 1 your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All rise.
Thank you. Please take your seats. Yes, Mr. Futrell.
May it please the Commission. Mr Sargent, I would like to ask you some questions about a different topic now. In your statement, you've dealt with an organisation called the Problem Gambling Support Services Committee, or PGSSC, in a number of places. And I won't take you to all of them now, but if I could start with paragraphs 108 to 111 of your statement. Where you've dealt briefly with the establishment or the formation of the committee and its constitution. Do I understand correctly that it was previously known as the Problem Gambling Support Services Advisory Committee, and it was formed in 1995?
I can't recall whether it was that's the title. It might be. It's one of the same committee, though. The question is, who are they advising?
All right. So there was a committee formed, to the best of your recollection, in around 1995.
Around the mid-90s, yes.
And it's now known as the PGSSC.
Yes, Problem Gambling Support Services Committee.
Now, when it was formed, do you then recall who the members were at the time of its formation?
The specific people know, but ultimately it constituted by the CEOs of Racing Weight, or then the TAB, Birdswood Casino, Lotteries Commission, and I think the WA Bookmakers Association as well. But it may not have started off with the CEOs, but eventually, in a very short time, it became the CEOs, and I was there as well.
Mr. Sargent, is there some interference or someone drilling in your room there? We hear
Not in my room, no. I'm in a special boardroom.
Okay.
Is it very bad?
No, just a couple of interruptions. I hope it won't continue. All right. Now, in those paragraphs, you have indicated that you do not consider it to be, this is the PGSSC, to be a committee of the GWC.
No, I didn't at that stage. But the GWC, I think, were basically consulted about creation of the committee.
Yes. So I've got a few questions about this committee, because it's mentioned quite a bit in the context of responsible service of gambling in documents and so forth. So does it have a constitution of which you're aware?
No, I think we had a strategic plan at some stage. It's about the best we would have had.
Does it have any governing rules?
No.
Does it have a bank account?
No, because it relied on the Gaming Wagering Commission bank account.
All right. So I take it from that it's not an incorporated association or hasn't got any corporate structure.
Correct.
How are the members or the membership of it determined?
Well, it was, if I recall correctly, when it was established, it was because we didn't have any legislation in the Casino Control Act or the Gaming Commission Act at that stage, and nor did we have any source of funds to fund activities like this, then this was a way of garnering some money from the proponents of gambling in Western Australia to put together some monies to, create some awareness of gambling problems that people have, and to provide some counselling services. One of the reasons why it wasn't established under the auspices directly of the Gaming and Wagering Commission Act, or the Gaming Commission Act then, was I thought, and I think some of the members of the Gaming Commission would have agreed with me, that the other bodies might have said, look, this is a government problem. We pay enough in taxes to the states, you fund it. Whereas in the other states, not only do they have to pay their various amounts of tax, they also have to fund these sort of services through a levy. So it was designed to get the bodies that participate in gambling to fund and own the issues to do with problem gambling.
Okay. My question was really directed to who chose the members? Who decided who would be a member of the committee?
Well, ultimately, as I said, it was decided the CEOs would become the members.
But who made that decision?
Well, that would have been the committee at the first meet, and then maybe I would have had some discussions with the participants, and that was agreed to. That is, Crown, then was Burswood. It would have been the TAB and the Lotteries Commission, the Bookmakers Association.
All right. Were you the person driving its formation? Was it your idea?
Well, it was one of my staff was helping me, who was also a driving force behind it as well.
All right. So did you see this as a function in your role as as the Director General of the department, or as the Chairman of the GWC?
More as the Director General Department.
All right. And did you invite the various CEOs of the various organisations you described to become members, did you?
We would have had a meeting and they would have agreed to it. I don't know if there was any formal invite, but it was agreed that this would be a way to go forward to provide some services to address issues to do with problem gambling.
All right. So I take it you're no longer on the committee. You're not a member now.
Now, I started about. Well, I knew I was retiring, and definitely 2017 I didn't attend. It may be some before 2016, but that would have been the last.
All right. So for were you the GWC representative on the committee, were you?
I wouldn't say I was a representative, but because I was both the DG and the Gaming Wagering Commission chairman, then I was a link between them.
All right.
If it became an issue or anything. But they did work fairly independent of the Gaming Wagering Commission.
Sorry, Mr. Sargent, I didn't mean to attribute a particular organisation to you. Whichever hat you were wearing, you were the representative of either the department or the GWC on that committee.
Yes.
And for about what period of time are we talking about?
Would have been from its inception through to 2016, probably 2015, 2016.
All right. Now, a little earlier, you mentioned that one of the reasons you wanted to involve, I think it was then called Burswood Resort, but for purposes of this inquiry, referring to it as Crown Perth.
Yes.
Crown Perth, the Lotteries Commission, the TAB as it then was, and I think you mentioned the bookies.
The Bookmakers Association, Government Bookmakers Association, yes.
Was to make them responsible in some way for the funding of the programs.
Yes.
And so how was the level of funding to be provided to the committee determined? And you can break it up into periods if there's differences, but just in what way was the funding worked out?
Well, I can't recall initially, but the vast majority of the money came from the three main gambling operators, and it was targeted first of all working out how much it would cost to provide a counselling service, and then to have an awareness campaign. So it was, I can't recall the amounts that were put in individually by the various organisations, but there was a genuine attempt to provide a service and then the funds would become forthcoming. The Gaming Wagering Commission did make a contribution to that, but nowhere near the same as what the gambling operators did.
All right. To the best of your recollection, were the amounts contributed by each of the organisations the same, or were they in some way related to the proportion of gambling services provided in the state?
No, the three I think it was fairly equal, particularly between the Lotteries Commission, the Burswood Casino and the TAB.
All right. And
the Gaming Commission didn't contribute as much as they did.
Okay. So do I understand from the answer you gave to one of my earlier questions that you worked out what budget the committee needed to provide its services and then worked out what the allocations would be associated with that?
It was a bit of trial and error in the initial years.
All right. And did it become a more regular process at some point in time?
It did.
And was it of the kind I've just described? There was a budget and then people contributed towards that budget in some proportions?
Correct.
Okay. Now, can I ask you to now consider paragraphs 97 to 100 of your statement. And in these paragraphs, again, you've briefly set out really what the functions of the PGSSC are. Could I direct your attention to paragraph 98? And you've described in that paragraph what you termed the purpose of the PGSSC. Is that its only purpose to your knowledge?
Well, I think yes. It was just about those, in particular 98.1 through 98.4. It was a bit more specific, appropriate. But no, that's what it basically provided, from what I can recall.
So the 98.1 to 98.4, they are the programs that it runs.
Yeah.
Are they?
Didn't happen immediately, but over time, that's what happened.
Okay. And is that it? Is that all? Are they all the programs that, as far as you're aware, it has?
Actually, I think that there's another aspect it did fund some of the research by Gambling Australia as well. It funded some of the Gambling Australia research. I'm pretty sure it did, but my memory is not 100% in that regard.
Right. And are you referring then to the organisation Gambling Research Australia or the GRA?
Yeah, it was a government group, yes. It was funded by the Commonwealth and the states.
And so well, can I just start by asking, in what way does it promote the help services available to people affected by gambling-related harm?
Well, it did have some awareness campaigns about, and they used to have a problem gambling support services, a problem gambling awareness week to have ads. I know that at some stage there were some radio ads. I'm not sure how many TV ads there were, but there was a number of ads put on buses and bus shelters and things like that. In the case of the TAB agencies and the agencies for lotteries and the casino, putting signs up in the casino, in toilets, etc. So it was a matter of promoting this activity. And of course, staff would also have been aware of the services available.
And is it promotion of its own services, as to say the ones referred to in 98.1, 98.2 and 98.3, or other entities as well?
When you say own services, the committee didn't run a helpline. That was coming out of the eastern states. The face-to-face counselling was I think it might have been Centrecare. It was a successful contractor there. Online counselling, well, that was basically maintained out somewhere in Australia as well. And the community awareness campaigns was conducted locally.
So do I understand correctly then, of those 4 programs, only the 4th one was something that the PGSSC did itself?
In its own, yes.
Right. So in relation to the other 3, did it contribute towards the funding of those activities?
Sorry, yes, because if you take the counselling service, it was fully funded in WA, fully funded by the Problem Gambling Support Services Committee. That was a local one. In the case of 24-hour helpline and the online 24-hour telephone helpline and the online counselling, that depended on how many people from WA were actually taking advantage of that particular service. So that was a shared one across Australia.
I see. So although the services were actually provided by a third party, the funding for it came through the PGSSC.
A WA share, yes.
I see. And did the PGSSC have any role to play in defining the scope of the services that would be provided? In other words, the level of counselling, the nature of the counselling that would be provided?
Well, in the case of the access to online servicing, yes. And in the case, even in the case of the community awareness campaigns, and it would determine how much money is going to be allocated to it, and would make a final decision on what sort of program would be undertaken.
All right, and who are making these decisions on behalf of the PGSSC? Was that by consensus of its members or by some other process?
No, it would have been consensus of the members.
And so the membership consisted of at least one government party, being yourself at the time you remember, so representing
Yes.
the Department of GWC. Were there any other government bodies represented on the PGSSC to your recollection?
Further on down the track there was, I can't remember exactly what department, it might have been the Family and Children's Services, someone who was concerned with family matters. There was another government representative which was invited to come in to become a member of it, but I wouldn't be 100% sure it was the Family and Children's Services, but it's logical that that would have been the group that would have nominated somebody to serve on the committee.
All right, but it's a voluntary organisation, is it not?
Oh, yes.
So the people invited, well, the people who are participating voluntarily essentially choose how much they're going to fund,
Yes.
and there's a consensus around how the funding is expended.
Yes.
And the majority on the committee are drawn from bodies that are providing gambling services of one kind or another, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Did you ever consider that putting those who are responsible for gambling-related harm effectively in charge of how services are provided for it involved a degree of conflict of interest?
No, I didn't, because I thought the participants there were always concerned that their products had some adverse impacts on the community, and they were quite happy to contribute. And I wasn't aware whether I am currently, I've seen that there has been some sort of decision taken in regard to it being a subcommittee of the Game Regime Commission, but in my tenure, I never considered it as a subcommittee of the Game Regime Commission. And my concern was, as I indicated to you before, that if we did bring it in under the fold of the Game Regime Commission, no guarantee that the funding would flow voluntarily from the organisation. So that's the premise on which I started the committee.
Yes, I understand that, but there's a difference obviously between how something is funded and then how the decision is made about how that funding is spent. So it could be funded by those entities, and yet decisions about how it's spent made by another body, correct?
I accept that, but it wasn't something that I took on board or considered at all during my tenure.
So it just didn't enter your mind that you might want to populate the membership with people independent of those groups that were providing gambling services?
No, did not.
During the period that you were a member of, or you were a representative on the PGSSC, do you recall if it undertook any studies or surveys of the prevalence of problem gambling, or let's put it differently, harm caused by gambling in Western Australia?
No, no.
Was it something that to which consideration was given, to your recollection, at any of the committee meetings of the PGSSC?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I think you mentioned earlier that there may have been a contribution to some research by GRA, by the Gambling Research Australia. Is that the only subject of possible involvement of the PGSSC in gambling research that you can recall?
That's all I can recall, yes.
In the period during which you were a member of the PGSSC, how frequently did it meet?
I can't recall. In the early years, it would have been quite frequent. It was not monthly, that's for sure. I don't even be guessing now on recollection whether it was 6 monthly. Maybe it might have stretched out if there wasn't any issues 12 monthly. But definitely meet once a year, and we would try and meet more than that, but would not have met monthly. So I can't give you a hard and fast answer on the frequency of meetings.
All right. So it obviously didn't meet terribly frequently. That might be reflective of its work. Who was responsible for monitoring how the programs it funded were being delivered?
Well, they weren't monitored, from what I can understand. The awareness campaigns may have been independently monitored, but that's about the extent of it. But I can't recall any evaluations being done of the services.
Okay, so is it the case then, in reality, the committee's function really was to collect funds from effectively those involved in the gambling industry and then allocate those funds to various groups that provided counselling services?
Yes.
Did it?
When you say council services, don't forget there was the awareness campaigns as well that was undertaken by the...
Sorry, I omitted those in my question. You're quite right. So there was the community awareness campaigns, and who undertook the actual work of performing the awareness campaigns?
Well, we were fortunate that we had organisations that were very much involved in marketing, that is the casino, the TAB and the Lotteries Commission. So those people helped, and then the contracts would be let to people to run the campaigns, but each of those organisations didn't run marketing for campaigns. So that was very much guided by those three organisations.
So when you say guided by those three organisations, who made decisions about the nature of the advertising campaigns that were going to be run for the purposes of the PGSSC?
Would have been the committee itself.
So was
ultimately made the decision.
Right. So was there a process by which, for example, the proposed advertising material, campaign materials would be brought to the PGSSC for consideration and approval?
Yes.
So it wasn't the case that it was simply delegated to one of Crown Perth or TAB or one of the other organisations to organise through its connections with the marketing companies?
No.
Right.
It was, to the best of my knowledge, it definitely was a group decision on those matters.
And so do I understand then that if there was a more intense period of decision making, you may meet more frequently than once a year to deal with these items? During the period that you were the chairman of the GWC, were you undertaking any regular reporting to the GWC of the activities of the PGSSC?
No, I can't recall. It would have been discussed at times, and the main time it would have been aired itself, it would have been the end of financial year and the reporting mechanisms, because the amount of money that the committee had was reflected within the financials of the GWC, and it was also included a section in the GWC's annual report.
Yes, so the GWC, not the department, provided the funding to the PGSSC, correct?
Correct.
And
sorry, look, I recall it was. If it had been provided by the department, then the GWC would have had to recoup the department for it. So I presume it would have gone direct to GWC. But I can't recall exactly. But one way or the other, the GWC would have funded it.
all right. So given the GWC was funding a contribution to the PGSSC, do you consider its members may have had an interest in knowing how its funds were being spent?
It could have done, but it never expressed any great desire to do that, given that the majority of funds came from the gambling participants. But that was never ever raised with me as an issue during my term there.
You were the chair of the GWC.
Yes, yes.
You had responsibility for preparation of its papers.
Mm.
It was within your power, wasn't it, to bring it to the attention of the GWC members?
Well, it would have been, but as I said, it wasn't a matter which I put the priority on, and there was reference to it in the annual reports and discussion, but it's quite possible that it could have been a much more formal approach, but the fact that the services were being provided and the Gaming Wage Commission people were aware of the services being provided, it wasn't raised as an issue with me.
All right. There is a more formal process now, though, is there not?
I think it's only just happened, though, only very recently.
Quite recently. So quite recently, there's the GWC resolved to have reports of the activities that PGSSC brought to its attention.
Well, I understand that there has been some advice to say that there is a subcommittee of them, and therefore I think I will take more ownership of it. But there's a formal process to nominate somebody to sit on that particular committee. And there's only one person being nominated at this stage.
All right. So do I understand just a couple of things? One, in your statement, you said that at least in your mind, you never considered the PGSSC to be a subcommittee of the GWC.
Correct, yes, that's my own perspective.
Is it the case that more recently you have the GWC received some advice that it may in fact be de facto or de jure a subcommittee of the GWC?
I haven't got that advice firsthand. I've only had some reference to the fact there's been some advice. That I no longer remember the commission, so I don't know what the advice is. All right,
so it wasn't advice. I'm not asking you to tell me if you got legal advice. It wasn't advice that you received, to your knowledge, when you were a member of the GWC then?
Correct.
All right. But whilst you were a member of the GWC, a decision was made to have reports from the member, the representative, brought to the GWC's attention, correct?
One of my last meetings, I think that was the intention to happen, yes.
Is there any government, aside from the contributions made by the GWC, is there any government funding made available to the PGSSC, or to your knowledge, while you're a member?
Not while I was a member, no.
So is the government contribution to the PGSSC really whatever the GWC allocates? Correct.
So the only other thing you can say is the resource that the department provides in supporting it. And the secretarial work was undertaken by the department.
And what was that? Again, remind me what the department was doing?
Well, someone had to provide the executive support minutes, etc., and process payments, etc. There was no charge made to the committee for that. That was provided by the department.
Okay. Could I please call up document GWC.002.0016.0016.007, which is an agenda of the GWC. Apparently it's subject to an NPO and should be restricted, so not for publication to the public. And the page, pinpoint page, is a paper agenda item 4.2, which is on page _0015. Subject to publication. I'm not 100% 100% sure, Commissioners, why this is the subject of a non-publication order, but
Sometimes these agendas and there's just subject to a full application for non-publication because there's the other agenda papers
I see.
which includes personal information.
all right, well, I'll try and deal with this without disclosing the contents of this paper, but it doesn't seem to me to have any...
I doubt that there's much in this paper that's of concern, but see how you go, Mr. Future.
Okay. All right, so you'll if you could ask you just to draw your attention to the recommendation on the first page there, which is a recommendation for an approval of an expansion of the casino and including introduction of fully automated table games or FATGs and increasing the number of EGMs to 2,000. And there's a reference, if I could just, on the following page, on page 0016, there's a heading, increase in EGMs and oblique table games, and a reference to an impact assessment. It's an attachment to the agenda paper.
That was done by Mr. Beecroft, I think.
The agenda paper or the impact assessment?
I think he did both.
All right. I've got some. I want to ask you if you generally recall this proposal, and I'm not going to ask you to remember every specific detail, Mr. Sargent. Whether you have a recollection of this proposal for the expansion of the Burswood Casino, as it was then known, and the increasing number of EGMs and the introduction of FATGs.
I broadly just remember the increase in machines, etc. But this was would have been supported by the impact assessment from Mr. Beecroft, which referred to as attachment 2.
Yes. So if I ask you to, if you could move operator to that attachment, which starts on page _0038. And that's just the front page of it. I take it, Mr. Sargent, that you would have received this document, or you did receive this document in about the time it was prepared in August 2010?
It would have been prepared around then for this particular decision of the Commission.
Yeah, and you were then familiar with its contents?
Look, I can't recall, but it would have been looking at the problem of gambling or the prevalence of gambling. I should imagine it would have even referred to the Australian gambling statistics, which reflected WA's growth or otherwise in gambling. Those sort of matters would have been discussed in that. I expect in that paper.
Okay, I'm going to ask if you could just read two pages of this impact assessment before I ask you some questions. So if we could navigate to _0045, and there's a section commencing harm minimisation. And this may have been alluded to in terms of Productivity Commission statistics. And when you're ready, if you could then ask the operator to move you to 0046, and I just want you to read until the end of the first paragraph on the following page.
Can you scroll down the page if you want me to read it, please? Scroll down again, please. Next page, if you like. First, I'm not aware that they actually proceeded with that. I'm not aware that they did proceed to undertake the awareness campaign.
You're referring to the paragraph at the beginning of that page?
Yeah, the PR, yeah.
Just wait, Mr. Sergeant, I've got some questions for you following on from this. So then there's one more reference, which you can just skip over the section dealing with problem gambling and move to the top of the following page on 0047. There are two paragraphs there I'd draw your attention to as well.
Okay.
Now, was it your understanding in August 2010 that the government intended to make some funds available for problem gambling in Western Australia in connection with the proposal to expand the Burswood Casino?
It did, but if I remember correctly, it was involved with providing grants to organisations or to community groups, as distinct from other matters. I can't recall whether the PGSC got any of that.
Well, that's my question, Mr. Sergeant. So was it your understanding that the government had allocated, in effect, a one-off payment of $2 million plus an annual amount of $500,000 to be shared between the PGSSC and the Department for Community Services?
I can remember the Department of Community Services, but I generally can't recall the PGSC getting any of that, but I could stand corrected on that.
Well, the question really is whether it was your understanding in 2010 when the committee, that's to say the GWC, was considering whether to approve this proposal, you and the other members understood as one of the factors to be taken into account when whether considering to approve it or not, that the PGSSC was to receive funding of a particular nature dealing with problem gambling.
No, I accept the statement in there. I'm just saying I can't recall whether that actually did transpire into money going to the PGSSC. I just can't recall.
Well, in paragraph, I think it's 22 of your witness statement, you have indicated that the department received the funds.
From my recollection, the money came into the department and we were actually acting as banker. You can see that the money was to be distributed and it said the Department for Community Services. I thought it was the Department of Family and Children's Services from my memory, but obviously that's not correct. And I can recall the Department for Community Services created a group to assess the grants from various organisations that had some issues to do with problem gambling. That's my memory of those funds.
All right, was this an arrangement between yourself as Director General of the department and the CEO of the other department?
I don't think it was an arrangement. I had an understanding that the money was coming in. It wasn't expended by the Department of Racing and Liquor on particular activities, other than later on when there became an issue with the financial counsellors. But prior to that, it was distributed on the recommendations of a committee, which, as I said, it was one of the departments. And I initially thought it was the Department of Family and Children's Services, but according to that document, it was Department of, what's that, Local Government and Communities, I think, in those days, it's Community Services. I cannot recall if any of that money ultimately flowed to the Problem Gambling Support Services Committee. It might have, but I can't recall.
Right. Okay. So just so I understand this, the money was appropriated and allocated to the department?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, it was, because we handed over quite a reasonable sum of money to the Department of Local Government and Communities.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Sergeant, it's been handed a note. We had this, I remember this happened last time you were giving evidence. You have a tendency to speak quite
fast. I'm trying to slow. I've got a note here to say slow.
Yeah. So you started out very well today, Mr. Sergeant. You may just look at that note a bit more frequently as the day wears on. So there was if I understand what you said correctly, the funds were in fact appropriated and allocated to the department in the first instance, and then a group or a committee decided how those funds would be spent, not for the purposes of the department itself, but in a connection with other activities.
Which had to associate with submission of problem gambling. It was not for the department to expend on its own resources.
Yes. Now, who made the decisions about the way in which those funds would be allocated?
The Department of Community Services, if that's what it's called, was the department that was basically charged with determining the priorities for it. It wasn't something that I, as Director General, did.
All right. Would it be fair to say that at least at the time that the members of the GWC were considering whether to approve the use of FATGs and an increase in the number of EGMs, they were encouraged to think that a fairly large portion of that funding would end up with the PGSSC?
I wouldn't use it as a large proportion, but based on that agenda paper, there would have been an expectation it would have ended up with PGSC, yeah.
You've mentioned a few times, I think, I can't remember the name of the department, the Community Services related department allocating the funds. Is that a reference to something referred to as the Beyond Gambling Grants program?
That does ring a bell, but I can't say for definite that's what it was called.
This might help to refresh your memory, Mr. Sergeant, so we can understand when we read the department's annual reports that we've got the right...
Which department is that?
The Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor.
In our report, was it?
Yeah, yes. The reference is PUB .0004.0006.0167. Is this the one I got wrong? And operator, if we could move to page .0210.
So that's summarising the program and where some of the grants went. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a reference there to the program and the financial statements a little later on indicate where the money went. But for the present purposes, I'm just interested in understanding the process by which these funds were allocated and whether any of them had anything to do with the PGSSC at all.
I can't recall whether some did flow back there. It may have done, but asking me now, I would have said no, but I could stand corrected on that. I knew there was a number of grants provided, and it was a program that was run more by the Department of Communities who made recommendations.
Okay.
I can't for sure say that any money flowed to the Public Gambling Support Services Committee, but it may have. It may have.
Was the PGSSC in any way involved with the Beyond Gambling Grants program itself?
No, it wasn't involved in making a decision on those grants, but I'm not sure how much of the money it did receive, if any. I can't recall.
All right. Now, in paragraphs 24 and 25, you've dealt with a slightly different topic, which is events in 2015 in connection with where the funds, or what the funds were used for, effectively. Do I understand from what you've said in these paragraphs that the process we just been through, where there was an allocation via the Department of Community Services of the funding, came to an end in 2015 and a different arrangement was reached with respect to how the funds would be utilised? That's correct, yes. And that was the subject of the MOU that's referred to in the topic and in your evidence there.
Can I just say, looking at that evidence, where it says Department of Family and Children's Services, maybe it should read Department of Communities, but I can't recall which was. So if that's wrong, it would be the Department of Communities rather than Department of Family and Children's Services.
All right, but do I understand this correctly, that although the funds at least initially have been earmarked for provision of services in connection with gambling-related harm, they were diverted in 2015 towards financial counselling services, which you understood or appreciated would have a knock-on or an associated benefit, because many of the people in requiring financial counselling services were also connected to harm from gambling.
Well, for many of those people, that's a point of call. So it made sense to continue that sort of service.
Well, I may have made too much of it, but that's what I understand by the second sentence in paragraph 24 of your statement.
That was my understanding, and talking to the other departments, that they recognised that it was a worthwhile activity for the government to continue funding.
Whilst you were the chairman of the GWC, to the best of your recollection, was there any reporting to the members of the GWC on the allocation of the funding referred to in the impact assessment and the decision making for that?
I can't recall if that happened. I would just, no, I can't recall that that did happen. Whether it was a verbal report, I can't comment at this stage. But I know it was something that was discussed with the Minister.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sargent, I want to return to a topic we covered to some extent in May, just to make sure that this Commission understands the full breadth of the information you can provide to assist its inquiry. You gave some evidence in your earlier statement and at that time about the extent to which you became educated during your time as the chairman of the GWC and as the Director General of the department with respect to casino gaming operations. And do I understand, we traverse a fair bit of ground, but do I understand that you would accept the proposition that casinos by their nature are vulnerable to criminal infiltration by various means?
Well, there's a degree of vulnerability, yes.
Yeah, yes, and talking about vulnerabilities, money laundering is one possible vulnerability.
Yes.
And I think you gave evidence last time that you, from time to time, attended conferences of other regulators who are involved in regulation of casinos in Australia and possibly overseas.
Yes.
In the course of your tenure, did you also inform yourself by reference to literature from bodies interested in casino regulation?
I don't recall specifically seeking it. I might have had some references at times, but it wasn't something that I pursued. I relied to some extent on some of my policy people to keep an eye on those sort of things and bring things to my attention.
Was there an expectation that I'm not suggesting that you yourself scanned every library looking for material, but was there an expectation that your policy people would bring to your attention relevant material as and when it was published that may have a bearing on the functions of you as Director General or as the Chair of the GWC?
I would expect that to have happened, yeah.
And in your tenure, did you become familiar with an organisation referred to as the Financial Action Task Force, or FAFT?
No, I don't recall that group, no.
Can I ask, just if you're familiar with this document in any event, the reference is INQ.130.001.2034. You may need to see more of the document, Mr. Sergeant, but is that a document that you have seen before?
No, it's not. What year was it produced?
It's dated March 2009.
I heard it there, yes, no. I don't recall seeing that document.
All right. Can I ask, nonetheless, if we could scroll to page point 2058. And could I asked you a question in a very broad and general way earlier about vulnerabilities, but could I draw your attention to paragraphs 86 and 87 and ask if you agree with those statements?
Scroll down, please.
I can see the fact that they are handing so much money. Yes, I can see that.
The question really is: do you agree? Would you accept those statements as an accurate summary of vulnerabilities of casinos to criminal?
Yes, I would accept that.
And can I ask if you could also navigate to point 2059, paragraphs 94, 95 through to the following page at the end of paragraph 98. And again, ask if you agree with what is said in those paragraphs.
I wouldn't agree with that comment. Within Australia, organised crime groups seek to control their own casinos or aspects of casino operations.
All right. Would you agree with the next sentence, criminals attempt to infiltrate?
Well, I'm not aware they attempted to influence casinos. I think particularly the West Australian casino had very good management people in control of those organisations at the board level, some very prominent business people. I don't necessarily accept that they would be able to infiltrate the casino from that point of view.
Sorry, Mr. Sergeant, it's not a question of whether they in fact infiltrated. The question is whether you accept that criminals attempt to infiltrate. So in other words, it's a risk or a vulnerability rather than a fact.
I wouldn't accept the criminals in Australia vulnerability. I can understand through the money laundering exercise, but other than that, no, I don't think so.
So do I understand you to say that you do not accept that within Australia, criminals attempt to infiltrate or influence casinos to facilitate theft, fraud, money laundering and other crimes? Is that your evidence?
Yes, I take that view.
So, sorry,
When you say criminals, I'm just trying to think of other activities could be attempted at a casino, but the main one would be, I would suspect, the money laundering. But I don't think they're in an environment where they necessarily want to come to the gaming floor area. But then you're asking me to respond now without really having time to contemplate it.
all right. So do I understand then that you would accept that criminals in Australia attempt to infiltrate or influence casinos to facilitate money laundering?
To influence casinos? Well, see, that's the word I'm labouring on, is to infiltrate the casino per se. I can understand what's happened in relation to money laundering and what's been revealed through the Bergen inquiry, but it's not necessary to infiltrate or influence the boards in charge of the casinos.
I understand. The difficulty you're having with answering this question, whether it happened in fact or whether it's a risk, what is being put to you is that criminals, by their nature, will make attempts to bring about, will give effect to their criminal enterprises, and they'll do it in many different ways. They may or may not succeed, depending on how they approach it. But at the very least, there's a risk that criminals may attempt to infiltrate and influence casino operators to bring about and facilitate money laundering. Would you agree with that?
There would be a risk, yes, I can accept that.
All right. Now, in the next paragraph, do you agree that it's a core function of all casino regulators is making certain that gaming is conducted honestly by approving the rules of the games and requiring the operator to provide a high standard of surveillance and security systems?
Yes.
And part of that is to ensure public confidence. The second sentence in that paragraph.
And with respect to criminal activity actually on the floor area, going activities in the casino, yes.
Minimises the opportunity for criminal activities and provides certainty of government revenues. Yes? Do you accept that proposition?
Yes.
All right. Now, you may not accept this based on what you've said earlier, but 98, paragraph 98, would you accept that? Casinos attract other forms of criminal activity?
Well, I'm not sure that that I had evidence of it within Western Australia. Depends on what you mean by vice.
Drugs,
Other crimes.
prostitution. Sorry?
Sorry?
I think vice would cover things like drugs or illicit drugs, prostitution, things of that nature.
I think that's a fair comment.
Now, you have mentioned, I think, in passing in answer to some of these questions, I've been asking you a reference to, I think you used the expression, the footprint for the casino, or worse to that effect.
Yes.
Activities and I think in May, in answer to some of the questions I asked you then, you made reference also to government inspectors, one of their functions being to carry out surveillance at the Perth casino. And I think at the time you said it was in amongst all their other activities as well. And if they became aware of criminal activity, they'd be expected to do something about it. And I think, again, paraphrasing, you said words to the effect that it wasn't something that you proactively went looking for. It was something that, if it came to your attention, you dealt with. Is that an accurate?
That's a good paraphrasing. Yes.
Now, coming back to activities in the footprint of the casino, would you accept that within the casino itself, and I know you're now, I expect you're now quite familiar with the facts surrounding the Riverbank investments accounts, and it's been the subject of quite a bit of evidence in other forums than in here, in this commission.
Sorry, I'm missing you. I'm losing a bit of communication. Can you repeat that and slower? Yeah.
Sorry, you no doubt are familiar with the Riverbank investments accounts, their bank accounts, and that there were findings in the Bergen inquiry to the effect that Crown facilitated money laundering through those accounts.
Only since about August 2019 was I familiar with the accounts, and then what Bergen has said, yes.
So I'm not asking you about bank accounts. These questions are directed to what's happening in the casino itself. Now, money laundering activities are not limited to operating a bank account, are they?
You mean implying what they're bringing cash in and things like that? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, an example might be someone purchasing from a player who has won a game, a jackpot, at a higher price with cash, and then taking the jackpot and cashing it in at the casino cage, as an example. Yep. That is an activity that could happen on the floor of the casino that would be an indicia of money laundering. Do you agree with that?
That's a possibility, yes.
And there are other ways in which people who wish to launder money may utilise the casino game playing as well. For example, there's something referred to as minimal play, where they purchase tickets to operate an electronic game machine, play a few games, and then cash the tickets out, for example. Would you accept that's a possible way in which money can be laundered at the casino?
When they cash the tickets out, what do they get for that?
New money.
And so, but whatever you have that you want it as a cash, to demonstrate as money laundering.
So let's say you take cash into the casino, purchase tickets in amounts under the threshold reporting, in several amounts under the threshold reporting, play a minimal amount of games, and then cash out the tickets at the end and receive what appears to be money from the casino for cashing out the tickets.
But have they had proof that it's cash in and cash out? What do they get to prove that it was won there? Because the ticket would go to the cage. So I understand a gambler coming wanting to get something, take money in and get a winner's check or something that shows the exact source of money where it came from. But if they bring cash in and cash out, they have to have some other documentary evidence to substantiate that, wouldn't it?
Purchase of the ticket would be one item. Purchase the ticket
Yep.
in amounts below the threshold reporting requirement. Go to the game machines, play a few games, and then cash out all of the tickets collectively later for a larger sum of money.
But what I'm trying to get is, what evidence does the gambler take to prove that they run at a casino?
They've got the tickets from the...
But tickets, if you're going to cash in, you've got ticket to cash in. You have to tick something in to the casino to get the money from the cage. You've got to basically hand over a ticket to get the money.
That's right. At the
But
end...
you don't retain the ticket then, my understanding.
All right. Do you not accept that you can utilise ticket in, ticket out as a means of laundering money by acquiring amounts below the threshold reporting amount?
Well, from my perspective, I can understand you could acquire tickets and then you gamble, but the casino is not giving you any evidence to substantiate that. Now, given my understanding now, I could have it wrong, but that's my understanding, is that what evidence they get to take that they've won it.
All right. What about collusive betting, where people are betting on each side of a bet together in order to create the appearance of betting, when in reality they're simply using the game as a means of creating the appearance of betting, when in fact their intention is to just circulate the money through the casino and leave with money from the cage.
But again, if you want to take money from the cage, you're looking at having some evidence that you've actually won it. Now, I don't know. I understand what you're saying. I understand the principle. If you put it on red or black, you get 2 to 1. And one loses, the other one wins. You've covered the bet. But the question I'm getting to make sure that there is sufficient evidence for someone to get something from the casino to substantiate they won that money.
Will they not cash the chips in at the end?
Yes, but what do they get in back in return?
A cheque or money or cash.
Well, if they ask for a cheque, then the cage has to check that they've actually gambled it. Now, if there's that's what Chris's criteria, that they had sufficient evidence to show that they'd actually won that money.
But if
I can understand what you're saying. No, I understand what you're saying.
But if they've been gambling at a table collusively, one wins, one loses. One walks out with a large cheque, and one walks out with nothing. They've achieved the purpose of making it appear to be winnings, have they not?
Well, that's assuming that one loses all the time, but you might find the chances of an even bet means they could be both winning and losing at the same time. So it may not work out exactly as it is.
All right.
But I can understand what you're saying, and if one could get evidence to that effect, then if one could get evidence to substantiate, so that you show someone, I won that at the casino, I understand your principle you're talking. I just want to question the practicalities of it, that's all.
Okay. So whether you can gather the evidence or not is one question. But it's a mechanism by which the betting at the casino, gaming at the casino, can be utilised by those wishing to utilise it for money laundering to launder the proceeds of crime. correct?
Well, there'd be attractiveness to do that, yes, I can accept that.
And again, that doesn't involve the need to analyse any bank account details. It just needs someone to observe behaviour on the casino floor. Now, I'd like you to clarify some of the evidence that you gave in May regarding the number of inspectors on the casino floor. At the time when you commenced as Director General of the department...
I just lost your phrase. Sorry, I used your phrase. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry. At the time you commenced as Director General of the department in 1992 or thereabouts, and Chairman of the GWC, at that time there were government inspectors at the Perth casino 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, were they not?
Correct.
And I think you gave evidence to the effect that at some point in time around 2000, 2002, there was a reduction in the time spent, if I can put it that way, at the casino from a 24-hour presence to something less than 24 hours. And also I think a reduction in the number of inspectors going to the casino. Now, I think you also said that you thought that was a fairly significant decision, that is to say, to go from 24 hours, 7 days a week to something less, and you thought there would be some record of that in the GWC minutes or meetings. What I would like to understand, if you're able to provide this information to the Commission, is what was the rationale or reason in that period, in the period 2000, 2002 or whenever it was, for moving away from a 24 hours, 7 days a week presence to something less?
Well, from what I recall, the staff that we had were looking more at the risk-based audits, and from the outset with the casino being established, the number of the inspectors were actually embedded in their processes, which wasn't absolutely essential to have. You can cover that through internal controls and also through surveillance. And the classic one would be inspector having to accompany the clearance of drop boxes. That didn't add anything, and in turn things like sitting in the cash count all day didn't add anything. So there are certain activities which were looked at to see how important it was that the inspectors be embedded in those processes. That's my recollection of the sort of thing that was done.
All right. So is it your evidence then that, the best of your recollection, there was a shift towards a more risk-based approach to the inspections? You mentioned also, though, in your answer, you referred to covering it with surveillance. What do you mean by that?
Well, the casino itself has extensive surveillance, and from the opening of the casino, it relied very much on very limited camera surveillance, and we had catwalks where people and inspectors walked around in the ceiling area. Now they have by 2002, catwalks were not used. They were a health hazard for smoke and dust, etc. But the surveillance capacity of the casinos had improved dramatically to enable reliance on the surveillance from that, and things like the drop box clearance was a very important part where the surveillance could cover that.
Now, you're making a reference there to surveillance of the casino. Does that mean to say the CCTV system of the casino operator?
That's correct.
The department doesn't have its own surveillance system, electronic surveillance system installed at the casino, does it?
It never has, but it does have access to the cameras.
All right. Now, how does it have access to the cameras?
Well, they have a dedicated control, a little desk area, which they could then access the cameras. I can't remember the detail, but they've always been able to access cameras.
All right, so the departmental officers had a dedicated area of access to cameras at the casino, is it?
It's part of their offices, yeah.
Was their office shared with the casino operator, or was it?
No.
So it was an independent, dedicated office for the departmental officers.
There was, and there still is one there, a dedicated office there for the officers.
So in terms of surveillance then of the casino operations, is it the case then that from the point at which this technology was installed, a government inspector could, if they so wished, view the surveillance in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
They could.
And in so doing, by means of the technology, they would achieve the same outcome as the catwalks were intended to achieve in the earlier period, correct?
I'd suggest it'd be better because the cameras with the zoom lenses could pick up more detail.
All right. So there's a better form of technology available. There's a dedicated area where it can be utilised. Is it, to the best of your knowledge, utilised by government inspectors in that way? As to say, watching, surveying what is occurring at the casino for the
Well, I understand so. Even today, there was an opportunity if they part of the audit program was to do things, it could be do a surveillance through the cameras.
And does the department, to your best of your knowledge, have the ability to record or review tapes from earlier periods in the day?
No, they would have relied on the recordings which the casino maintained, because it has to maintain recordings of all the cameras.
So the casino maintains recordings to which the department has access to the best of your knowledge?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so coming back to 2002 then, if one of the reasons for reducing 24 hours, 7 days a week was associated with the risk-based, I think you referred to audit, that doesn't apply, does it, to surveillance, surely? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week surveillance could be maintained with technology.
I don't quite understand. You mean the cameras and that and the backups of the tapes, or be different now, but the recordings are available to be looked at if they need to call something up after the event, or they could be looked at live. I'm not quite with you what you're getting at.
All I mean to say is that if the government inspector the department itself wants to maintain a full surveillance presence at the Perth casino, he could have a person dedicated, or people dedicated, sitting in the control room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, watching the cameras in real time.
Well, in theory, it could be whether that's a priority you would assign to using your inspectoral services.
I'm dealing with the could, not whether they do. Now, they would also have the ability, would they not, to watch what is happening on the casino floor and in so doing, make observations about the behaviour of patrons.
They could do, yes.
So in terms of making observations of suspicious activities of patrons that might be indicia of criminal activity, with 24 hours a day, 7 days surveillance, the government inspectors could actually undertake that task, could they not?
They could, if they were assigned to that particular activity. Yes, they could.
And that doesn't require any sophisticated analysis of bank account details, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. No.
And now, can I want to come to the decision in 2015 to reduce the presence and understand some of the reasons behind that, if you don't mind. So could I ask that we call up GWC .0002.0016.0155. And the page pinpoint reference is _0017. There's nothing else. Is it? Mr. Sargent, I think you may have referred to this in your statement, so I take it you have re-familiarised yourself with this agenda paper.
I'm broadly familiar with it.
Yes. So, could I ask you to look at the, I think we may have already covered this actually, if you look at the bottom of the page 0017 and top of 0018, and just read that, and if you don't mind, having read it, just confirming it's an accurate summary of the position before 2015.
Yes, okay.
So as of 2015, the position was that there were 2 shifts.
Yes.
In total, with a presence on the casino, at the casino for 20.5 hours a day.
That's what was happening, yes.
And that was 7 days a week, is that right?
Yes.
And could I ask you, I think you've made reference to this in your statement, at the bottom of the following page, 0018, there's a paragraph that begins, "There is little doubt."
That's Mr. Connolly's observation, I think, about the experience with GIs.
Correct. And you've made a specific reference to this in your...
I quoted it, I think, in my evidence tonight.
Yes.
Yes.
If you did.
And I'm not aware of anything more than that that's coming up, but Mr. Connolly would have been far better placed than me to experience that.
I'm just going to ask you some questions, Mr. Sargent, about this, because this is promoted as a reason for reducing the number of inspectors, isn't it?
It's one of the reasons. He basically, and I couldn't in any way have any other evidence to say, but the vast majority of the work was planned and it's planned activity rather than reactive activity. And I wasn't aware of anything which would be contrary to that.
But it's also the absence of proactive activity resulting in any discoveries of anything suspicious or untoward at the casino, correct?
Yes.
Now, is a possible reason, for example, for the absence of identifying suspicious activities, is it possible that the presence of a dedicated extensive, as in 20.5 hours a day, presence of government inspectors acted as a deterrent to those who would otherwise wish to carry out criminal activities at the casino?
Obviously, it's assuming that they are aware that inspectors are doing that work, but I think people are aware that casinos, one thing they do have is extensive surveillance, camera activity available, and I'm not sure how much they would actually go to that sort of venue for that activity, given the surveillance material that is available.
Is it also possible that the presence of government inspectors would encourage the casino operator itself to carry out its surveillance activities more assiduously, more carefully, knowing that there's someone else there watching?
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
Would you agree that it's a possibility as a matter of human behaviour?
Well, there's always a possibility, but some of the professionalism of the people that worked in that area, the man in charge of surveillance, who I knew for many years, was a very professional operator. He was very proud of the work that he did, and yeah, but I'll put it down as a possibility, yes.
All right. Now, would you agree with the proposition that reducing the number of shifts in around 2002 diminished the ability of the government inspectors to carry out surveillance on the casino footprint?
Well, I don't think so, because of the hours which they weren't going to be there was the very early hours in the morning, and I think people could still, well, inspectors I should say, could still maintain a level of surveillance which wasn't diminished by going from 24 down to 20 and a half. And a lot of the work that was taken away was not having to be embedded in various activities that were internal control matters. And I can understand why it came in place, because people had to have confidence in casinos from day one. And the way to do that is to have the presence of casinos inspectors side by side on many activities.
To your knowledge, to what extent were the government inspectors undertaking the surveillance function before 2015?
I can't answer that. I don't know. I don't know.
So it's possible, isn't it, that if they were not actively looking, they wouldn't find?
It's a possibility, yes, I agree. But I'm not sure how much they'll put there. You can assign an inspector to do that task, but how diligent they are depends on their attitude towards the work, because it's not the most challenging of work to sit there. But I accept that as a possibility, yes.
All I'm putting to you, Mr. Sargent, is there are a number of possible other explanations for the absence of any records of proactively discovered criminal activity that indicate that the presence of government inspectors either is a positive thing or neutral, in the sense that if they're not doing their job, if they're not looking, they're not going to find anything.
If they're not looking, yes, you won't find. I agree.
So would you agree that the absence of proactive detection of criminal activity by government inspectors is not evidence there is not in fact criminal activity taking place?
Oh, yes, I can accept that.
Can I ask you, there's a reference to a move to a risk-based approach in Mr. Connolly's paper. How was the risk-based approach applied to the vulnerability or risk of criminal activity on the casino footprint?
I can't answer that. I don't know. I wasn't in that much involved in that activity. I had some briefings probably very early, many years ago, but I don't know how that would have been addressed. I can't answer that.
Well, a decision was made to reduce the number of inspectors and the time that they were spending at the casino. The rationale, at least in part, was because the department was moving to a risk-based approach. So what assessment was done, to your knowledge, of the risk in 2015 in order to inform the approach?
I can't recall that. I can't recall that.
You can't recall, or was no risk assessment undertaken?
Well, there may not have been a risk assessment done. I can't recall. There may not have been a risk assessment done. But I know that we're very much focused on the risk assessment of the playing of games and the activities within the casino about the confidence in the games per se. That was very much a priority. As for the risk assessment regarding the criminality we're talking about, and that I can't recall there's anything done, may not have been done in that regard.
Well, if you don't undertake an assessment of the risk, how can you be sure or have any knowledge that your approach to regulating it is appropriate? Well,
the assessment was being done in terms of the games that were being played and the activities there in relation to the games, as I'm saying. It wasn't to do with the criminal activity. It was a very mature product that we were dealing with. The activities were such that it was quite well known what the risks were around those activities. But as I said, I don't recall, and I don't think there would have been anything done in relation to the criminality aspect within the casino footprint.
So then what informed the decision to reduce the degree of surveillance in 2015?
Well, the decision was coming through with Mr. Connolly as the Chief Casino Officer. I was aware of the broad processes under which they had all the audits done. They create the charts of all the findings. They had a compliance committee that looked at the outcomes, had all the processes basically documented, the key controls documented, and they made those assessments regarding those aspects of the activities on the gaming floor area. Now, all I say is that that was something which very, very much Mr. Connolly's crew were basically assigned with major responsibility for it, and I relied very much on their professionalism and their knowledge of casino gaming. Mr. Connolly, like Mr. Regan, were two people who had first-hand knowledge and very good knowledge of regulating and the activities on the casino floor print.
Mr. Sargent, you are going to slow down a little bit. You ran away a little bit in that answer. Do I understand from that answer that you relied, the substance of it is that you relied on Mr. Connolly?
Oh, definitely.
And you relied on him to provide you with his assessment of the extent to which there were risks associated with reduction in the surveillance of the Perth casino?
Yes.
Did you have discussions with Mr. Connolly before this paper was prepared about the proposal to reduce the number of inspectors?
There was an earlier paper, I think, came to one. That was the August meeting, I understand, wasn't it? That was that. So there was another paper that came to the Commission earlier in the year about the principles of regulating the casino. So I was aware of that sort of philosophy.
Yes, but that philosophy was not Mr. Connolly's philosophy alone, was it?
No, but ultimately it was one that he was endorsing.
And that philosophy was developed in conjunction with you?
No, it wouldn't have been very much in conjunction with me directly.
You were not involved in the development of the departmental policy in relation to what's referred to as the compliance strategy? That was not something you were involved in?
Well, when you say involved, I would have been briefed on it, but the day-to-day development of those particular strategies, I left very much for the crew that were involved in it. They were the inspectorate to work that through, the directives.
Leaving aside the day-to-day, the ultimate decision to endorse that policy as a policy of the department was yours, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, I accept that.
And to make that decision, you would have had to have informed yourself of the reasons for that policy, no?
Well, I think I established myself to a level where I had confidence in what Mr. Connolly was proposing, yes.
It's be a convenient time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Futrell. Mr. Sargent, before we break for lunch, there was just one matter you mentioned, and before we move on, I thought I'd ask you about it. You referred, I thought, to someone you described as a very professional person. Was it in either security or surveillance at Perth Casino? And I just wanted the name of that person.
I think it might have been Mr. Hughes, who was there. I don't know if he's retired now, but he was the sort of person who was in charge of the security area out at Crown, when Burswood then became Crown. And Mr. Hughes, I think it is, but I couldn't categorically state that's his name.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent. We will now adjourn for lunch until 2 p.m. Thank you. If you could be back in time to recommence at 3 p.m. your time. No, sorry, that's 4 p.m. your time. Thank you, Mr. Sargent. We will now adjourn.
All rise.
Mr. Associate.